just me? Or is it getting crazier out there?
Good evening, fellow creeps and kooks. My name is Aleece, and welcome to the Late Late Horror Show. Some of you may remember me from a few years back. I did some movie reviews and discussions on here with Dino, but now we're going to be trying out a few new things, so hopefully you all will like it. And with that, I just have something to say, or what is it? Oh, Addams Family. So, with the recent release of the Wednesday series on Netflix, I thought it might be fun just to discuss the Addams Family as a whole, starting from the very beginning to where we are now, and just sort of talk about and discuss how the show, the series, the characters have changed from the beginning through current times. So, let's begin. Created by Charles Addams, the original Addams Family began as a one-panel comic strip starting in 1938. Now, the images from this, not that they've been lost to time, but I think when most people think of the Addams Family, what first comes to mind are the 1990s movies by Barry Sonnenfeld starring Raul Julia, Angelica Houston, and most notably Christina Ricci as Wednesday. But it's interesting how those movies and what has come since then have really differed from the original iteration and the show starting in 1964. So, the 1964 sitcom, which starring John Astin, who is tied for me with Raul Julia as my favorite Gomez, has a very different feel to it from the one panel comic strip by Charles Addams himself. Obviously, changes were made to make it into a 1960s sitcom. It's a lot goofier, a lot of that grotesque darkness that is featured in the comics is a bit lost in the show. The show replaces a lot of darkness with more whimsy and formulaic sitcom humor, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I actually really enjoy it. What is interesting, one of the many interesting things, is the humor and how it is very similar with both the strip and the sitcom, which is something that does change later on, but we'll get back into that in a little bit. So, the context of the humor of the Addams Family is largely that they don't see themselves as being different or abnormal or above regular society. They are just living in their world, doing their thing, and they revel in their own individuality, but they very much are a part of regular society, especially in the 1960s sitcom. Morticia joins, I think, like a PTA. Gomez gets upset that their taxes aren't high enough on their house. And when people come over and get scared off, they aren't doing anything to purposefully scare them off. They're like, oh, what's that guy's deal? Oh, he probably had to go somewhere. They are completely oblivious to kind of how strange they are to the rest of the world, which is really funny how that side of the humor really differs in later iterations. Now, the sitcom is very, very much worth another rewatch or just watching it for the first time. There's a lot of really fun performances. John Astin is just so joyfully charismatic and almost childlike in his performance as Gomez. Morticia, she is much more the straight man to Gomez's antics, and they just bounce off each other so well, and you see the love there. She plays with his model trains with him. They fence together. She speaks French, and he does the kiss up the arm. It's all great, and the love the family has for each other is one of the most endearing aspects of the Addams Family in general, at least to me, and which is such a stark contrast, especially within the marriage of Gomez and Morticia, to other shows and the cultural norms of the time. They are completely, obviously in love with each other, and they have fun together. They do activities and share hobbies. Whereas in other sitcoms of the era, there was typically a lot more strife and not as much closeness between married couples. The Dick Van Dyke Show was definitely much closer, but they still were more or less a typical 1960s couple. But then when you have it contrasted, even with other shows kind of a similar ilk, such as Bewitched or I Dream of Jeannie, where there is a magical element, you see these, Samantha and Jeannie always trying to hide who they are and their respective husbands, trying to keep the secret of their magic. And I love that the Addamses never feel the need to disguise themselves because it never even crosses their mind that there's anything to disguise or hide. And one of my favorite moments from the sitcom is an episode where two bank robbers kind of they take refuge in the Addams house, and it also happens to be Halloween. So they think that they're just trick-or-treaters, and they see these bags of money and just assume that the fellow neighbors were just giving them bags of money. Like, oh, to think that we were only going to give you apples. Here, have more money because we're the casual rich people who don't work. Here you go. Don't you love this community where we're all so giving? And it's so much fun. But moving on from this sitcom a bit, we go into the 1970s where there's the animated show. I honestly don't have much to say because it ran for 13 episodes. It's not very good. The voice actor for Gomez, I don't know who he is, but the voice itself is just very grating. It's Addams Family road tripping. I'm not a fan. I've only managed to watch a few clips because that's all I really could stand. If you like it, great. It's just not my bag. But going on from there is what is probably the most well-known and influential iteration of the Addams Family, that being the Addams Family and Addams Family Values. Between the two movies, most people, myself included, probably have the most fond memories and clear memories of the sequel, Addams Family Values, as opposed to the first film, which is interesting because revenue-wise, the sequel did not do nearly as well in theaters. It was a bit of a financial disappointment. But that's the one that is held most fondly in everyone's hearts. So we'll get into that a little bit why. But first, let's talk about the first film that didn't start it all, but started it all for a new era. Raul Julia and Angelica Houston as Gomez and Morticia, I think are probably the most iconic versions of these characters. The way that Morticia is framed, very much in the old Hollywood style, with her eyes always highlighted and just her delivery. She was born to play Morticia, which is very funny because Cher was the original first pick for the role, and when Angelica Houston was offered the role, she actually asked, well, have you thought about Cher? Which, I can definitely see that, but can you picture anyone else but Angelica Houston in that role now? And Raul Julia, John Astin as Gomez, I absolutely adore. Raul Julia and Angelica Houston brought a sultriness and sexiness that obviously a sitcom in the 60s would not be able to show. And these two are just steamy together. And it's not explicitly, nothing in these movies is all that explicitly sexual. It still is PG or PG 13. But it's very, very well, sultry rather than sexual. There is a difference, and I typically prefer sultry. And then we have Christopher Lloyd as Fester. Fester is probably the most interesting of the Addamses insofar as the differences in the characterization over the years. Fester of the 1960s sitcom kind of changed depending on what the plot needed him to be. Sometimes he would just be kind of a wild card or a little bit more naive. He kind of doesn't know that what he's doing is dangerous. In other episodes, he's more of a madman who is much more aware of his murderous tendencies. And then we see Fester changing in different ways, going beyond the Barry Sonnenfeld films. In these films with Christopher Lloyd, a very different take on Fester. For one, he is Gomez's brother versus Morticia's uncle. And they start him off in the first movie as an imposter. He is being made to pretend to be the lost Fester, the lost Addams brother, so they can get the money. And plot-wise, the first movie is very muddled. I think when people talk about their love for the first movie, it's more the performances and the aesthetic rather than the plot itself. Because it's just very not great plot-wise, to be honest. At least that's what I think, but it doesn't kill any love for it for me. It's just fun, and you just love to watch all of these people doing what they're doing. And probably the biggest thing to come out of Addams Family was Christina Ricci as Wednesday. Especially in the 1960s sitcom, Wednesday was just a kid. She was cute, and sure, she did weird things, like she cried in an episode, I think in the pilot, because she went to school and the dragon died in the story because he was killed by the knight in shining armor, and she has her little dance with Lurch. But really, Wednesday and Pugsley are just kind of your standard kids, and they're not even in a lot of episodes. And pretty much the same thing in the 1970s animated series. There's not really a whole lot going on there. Christina Ricci's very deadpan performance is what made Wednesday Wednesday. That is how she has been portrayed and thought of ever since. And as young as she was in the first film even, you see her strengths as an actress, and it was actually her idea to be sleeping with her hands like this, like she's a corpse, which is fantastic. And I love that Barry Sonnenfeld ran with that and allowed her to bring her own ideas to the role. Pugsley, I honestly don't have too much to say about Pugsley, unfortunately. Him and Wednesday doing things together is a lot of fun. Their whole performance at the school is great, where she's cutting off limbs and Gomez and Morticia are just so proud and eating it up, is wonderful. But unfortunately, Pugsley generally does get sidelined in favor of Wednesday. But what are you gonna do? Not everybody is Christina Ricci, I guess. Anyways, moving on to Addams Family values, the plot is a lot more consistent, I would say. There's a lot more going on. It's easier to follow. But it still has some similar elements with sort of an imposter character and someone to try to get one over on the Addams family for their money. But Addams Family values It's Joan Cusack as Debbie Jelinski, who is just my everything. She is so wonderful and such a great addition to the franchise. You can't you she's probably one of the most fun, campy female villains of all time, at least live action. And which is great, but also story wise does present an interesting problem because at moments in the story, she fits in with the Addams. She almost out crazies the Addams, which is an interesting choice to make the villain of the piece a character who is even more psychopathic and murderous than the Addams themselves. And as fun as her performance is, and as much as she chews the scenery in the best way, and as a character actress, have I been inspired by her? Yes. But for the Addams family itself, it's an interesting, odd choice. I'm not criticizing it. It's just something to think about and just reflecting on the film for a while. That is something that has come up in my mind that I don't know. Kind of lost my train of thought there. That's what happens when you're thinking of Joan Cusack as Debbie Jelinski. Oh, in those white dresses. She's so great. But I think what most people would agree is the greatest aspect of Addams Family Values is the summer camp B plot and the iconic play of the first Thanksgiving at summer camp. Sure, we'll go for it. But the whole speech that Wednesday has is just the greatest thing. Her time at the camp and sort of pretending to be taken over by these overly jolly camp counselors and the whitewashing of the camp itself and the turnaround with the Native Americans is wonderful. And that's something that I do appreciate they retain elements of in the Wednesday show. But more on that in a bit. So we've got Addams Family. We've got Addams Family Values. Both great movies with these amazing performances. You probably have the best iteration of Fester, Christopher Lloyd, with his kind of, well, he brings the creepy to the creepy and kooky of Addams Family. And just Christopher Lloyding it up. It's wonderful. And then that was followed with another animated series, which is not bad. John Astin, the original Gomez from the 60s, returns to voice Gomez, which is lovely. I'll admit I didn't watch too much of it. I was more of a Beetlejuice animated series kind of girl. And also the Addams Family animated show was on Sunday mornings. I was raised Catholic. Sunday mornings we had to go to church, so I didn't really get to watch too much TV on Sundays, unfortunately. Would have much rather been watching that. Anyway, but then that was followed by one of the worst things to come for Addams Family, which was the show, The New Addams Family. Again, I don't really have much to say about it other than that it's just not great. John Astin appears as a Grandpa Addams, which is a breath of fresh air. Otherwise, it really doesn't know what to do with the characters. It's just not good. The actress who plays Wednesday, she's probably, other than John Aston's featured performance, is probably the best part. But yeah, there just isn't a whole lot to say other than skip it. Even if you're a completionist, definitely worth skipping. Speaking of skipping, that brings us to Addams Family reunion. That's one you just stay home. You don't need to reunite with this one. Even Tim Curry couldn't save this movie. It is bafflingly awful. You have Tim Curry as Gomez, Daryl Hannah as Morticia. Now, she would not be my first pick for Morticia, but she is obviously a brilliant actress. She brings nothing in this movie, and I don't think it's her fault. Same with Tim Curry. It feels like they're almost chained to the floor and uncomfortable. I don't know what is going on with the way the movie is lit. Everything is completely oversaturated. It looks terrible. The entire movie looks ugly. It has awful visual effects. I mean, we're talking science fiction original movie kind of effects, which wouldn't be so bad if they didn't focus on it so much. And I know I said that the plot of Addams Family was a little bit muddled. This just makes absolutely no sense. There is something, the grandparents come down with a sickness to make them normal, and there is a switcheroo of the family going to a different place and other people going to the Addams family house, and again, them trying to get the money. Something with a nuclear warhead at the very end. Plot threads are brought up and dropped. It's completely nonsensical, and I don't know why it was made. I don't know who it was made for. I wish Tim Curry had been, I don't know, just having fun by himself or doing anything else in probably the week it took to film this god-awful thing. But speaking of thing, he's my favorite part of Wednesday. So Wednesday, I did watch it twice, in fact. And I have a lot of thoughts on it, which could be an entire video in and of itself. And I don't want to get into any spoilers because it still is relatively recent. And if you're watching this, and I don't want to spoil much, but I do think it is definitely worth a watch and definitely worth a second watch. I think it does get better the second time you watch through the show. I appreciated a lot more things about it during my rewatch than I did upon my initial watch, and I revised a lot of my opinions upon that second watch. Jenna Ortega as Wednesday steals the show. She is absolutely incredible. I've been a fan of hers since I saw her in season 2 of the show You, and then she was in Scream 5 last year, and I'm so happy that she's becoming like a young sort of horror queen. And having a Latina Wednesday, and Luis Guzman plays Gomez. The Addams family is of Mexican descent, which is great. Luis Guzman is I really enjoy him as Gomez. He's got such good dad energy about him, and he's so sweet, and there's still the clear love between him and Morticia. Catherine Zeta-Jones as Morticia, amazing choice. I they're not featured incredibly heavily in the show. It is much more focused on Wednesday and her time at the Nevermore Academy, which I think is great. The way Morticia is characterized is sort of through the eyes of a 16-year-old girl who is at odds with her mother, which is an interesting dynamic for the Addams family, which we haven't really seen before. Usually the family is very cohesive and very supportive of each other. Seeing there be some family drama and a teenager not wanting to follow in her mother's footsteps and outright saying she doesn't want to be like her parents does track for a teenage character. There's been a lot of back and forth as to whether that is true for Wednesday and for the Addams. But I personally didn't mind it. I really like the dynamic between Wednesday and Pugsley. He's not in it very much, but it's actually very sweet. She talks down to him and calls him weak a lot, but there is clearly love there, as much love as Wednesday can really show for another person. And she does kind of pick up a sort of surrogate younger brother figure in one of her fellow students, which is also one of my favorite additions. This boy is just adorable, and I want to adopt him or be his friend. Be his friend. If you watch the show, you'll get that. You should watch it. He's amazing. Anyway, Thing. This is my favorite version of Thing. It's amazing how much character and personality a disembodied hand can have, and Wednesday just nails it with the character of Thing. He's so cheeky and sneaky and adorable, and just he is his own character, and he somehow really steals the show. I absolutely love it, and he made me cry somehow. Or nearly cry. I won't ever admit to crying, but nearly. So that is my endorsement of Wednesday and Thing in particular. Gwendolyn Christie. She plays Principal Weems, who is the principal of the academy, and she is just always a joy to watch in anything and everything, whether it's Brienne of Tarth, Lucifer, and Sandman, Sandman is also something I could talk about for far longer than necessary, but maybe a subject for another day. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, she is absolutely lovely. She just commands the screen and is just wonderful to watch in every frame. And I also think that she is just ethereally beautiful. So there's that. Fester is played by Fred Armisen, and he's a lot of fun. I like that he is featured. He's featured in the show. He's not focused on, he is only in a couple of episodes, which I am glad. Fred Armisen's performance as Fester a little goes a long way. If there was an entire Fester spinoff, I honestly don't know if I would watch it, but he brings a lot more goofiness to Fester than in some other iterations. It's a lot more palatable than in, say, the new Addams Family show or Addams Family Reunion or the other animated Addams Family movies, which I realized I totally skipped, which is how my mind works because I kind of forget those happened. So, speaking of continuing on with Wednesday, I definitely think it is worth a watch. There is a lot to love about it. There is a core mystery that, honestly, I could take it or leave it. I wish that there had been more focus on other things throughout the show than so much of this mystery that is pretty obvious, especially knowing who some of the actors are who are cast in the show. But there are a lot of great performances by a lot of the younger actors. The actress who plays Enid, who is Wednesday's roommate, is just so lovely. She is adorable and sweet. And again, I would adopt this girl in a heartbeat. The actress who plays Bianca, who is sort of the queen bee at the school, she is great. And the layers she brings to the role, and a role that seems to be like it would be one note and is actually surprisingly has a lot of surprising depth to it. That was very refreshing. And it is helmed by Tim Burton. He directs about half of the episodes, and you see that a lot in the composition of a lot of the shots in Wednesday really harken back to a lot of Tim Burton's other works and are very beautiful to look at. But you can see Tim Burton's hand in it very, very much. So, speaking of the animated films that I forgot to talk about, what starts with that is actually involved with Tim Burton. So, back in 2010, Illumination, the animation studio, bought the rights to the Addams Family with the original intention of having it be a stop motion animated show directed by Tim Burton, which for reasons ended up falling through. And I'm bummed about that, because if there was, I love stop motion. That is one of my favorite mediums of animation. And if it were done in a way similar to Frankenweenie or Corpse Bride, I don't know, maybe if they brought Henry Selick in to work on it with Tim Burton, that could have been amazing. But that didn't happen. And eventually we had the sort of 3D animation of the Addams Family in 2019 and then the sequel in 2021. I'll admit, I did not watch these movies. I am not a fan of Illumination as a studio. I am not a fan of most of their properties. That is an entirely different video for an entirely other time or different channel, or me after half a bottle of wine venting about the Lorax and Minions. But this is neither the time nor place. But you see a lot of that style in these movies, and I've watched clips. It's just very much of that brand. If you like it, that's awesome. It's not for me. I appreciate that the design of the characters was meant to be close to the original cartoons by Charles Addams. But it did not work for me in the 3D animated style. It just looks strange and ugly in a not endearing way. I know that in the comics, Wednesday has a long, pale face, but it's exaggerated so much in these movies to where it almost looks like a balloon. Fester just makes me uncomfortable to look at. Kind of same with Gomez. And the voice cast is fantastic. Oscar Isaac, Charlize Theron. Oh my goodness, I can't think of her name right now, who plays Wednesday, but she's from Kick-Ass. She played Carrie in the Carrie reboot. Chloe Grace Moretz, something like that. Chloe Grace Moretz, I believe. And
Grace Moretz.
Thank you, Dino. The disembodied voice. That would be Thing if Thing could talk. Finn Wolfhard is Pugsley. Love me some Stranger Things. children, not so childlike anymore. But, anyways, the voice cast is wonderful. It's just kind of a bummer that the animation is what it is, and the message of the at least the first movie is sort of, be yourself and it's okay to be weird, which is a weird message for the Addams family because they didn't need to accept themselves for who they are. A huge part of the charm, whether it is them being oblivious to how strange they are or they hold it as a badge of honor, is their strangeness, and that they don't need to be told to accept themselves. So yeah, I can't really go with that. The 2021 sequel kind of harkens back to the 1970s animated series where they are on the road. Fine. I believe that movie does focus mostly on Wednesday, so, fine. Maybe I'll get around to watching them one of these days. If you've seen them, if you like them, if you think they're worth a watch, let me know in the comments. And I think this is a good time to discuss Addams Family, the musical. So, that's a thing that exists. I am a musical theater person. I grew up doing musical theater. I just did a production of Annie. I live and breathe for show tunes and music theater. I am such a nerd for all that. I don't like the Addams Family musical. And I wish I did. I wish I could like it. I just love the Addams Family itself, and the musical is one of the worst representations of all of the characters. I could do an entire video about the Addams Family musical, both the production of it and how it changed from the pre-shows in Chicago to Broadway to the way it has been now. They've made several revisions to the script and the story. And in some ways, the revisions that were made improve on things, but in others, it just hammers in the badness. So, a lot of my issue with the Addams Family, the musical, is Morticia and Wednesday. Basically, Wednesday has fallen in love with a normal boy, and she's bringing him and his parents over to meet her family for the first time. And she wants her family to try to act more normal. It's La Cage aux Folles or The Birdcage, which is ironic because the Broadway production starred Nathan Lane as Gomez. Which, fine, I love Nathan Lane, and, he's great in everything.
But not as Gomez.
Yeah, he just doesn't fit as Gomez. His style of humor, his presentation, just doesn't fit for a character like Gomez. And Bebe Neuwirth as Morticia, again, she is a music theater icon. She just doesn't fit as Morticia, and the character of Morticia herself, who at least in the revisions, her story arc is that she's afraid of aging. She gets insecure because Wednesday calls her old, and she doesn't think she's sexy anymore, and she's afraid of getting old and getting crow's feet, and she starts to feel her age because Wednesday is young and fertile. It's very strange, and so not Morticia. If anyone would be excited about growing old and seeing wrinkles and getting closer to becoming dust in the ground next to your love, it's Morticia. And it's such a disservice to that character. Like it's not this is not the Addams way. And then we have Wednesday falling in love with a normal boy, which, in theory, I can go with. We saw sort of a little bit of that in Addams Family Values. Wednesday does have a little bit of a preteen kind of romance with a kid at camp. Granted, he's still one of the camp outcasts, but he's still, he's not like the Addams. And we see that in Wednesday, there is a love triangle with a boy from the school and a boy in town, which when you watch the show and how that ends up working out, it actually does make a lot more sense, and the way that is executed, it does work. Big reason why it doesn't in Addams Family the musical is that Wednesday is aware of how abnormal she and her family are and wanting them to be normal. When the Addams Family is self-aware, it kind of ruins the entire conceit of the Addams Family, the humor and their darkness. It takes away from what makes them the Addamses, and I can't go with it. And the idea of a boy's love suddenly making Wednesday want to go to Disneyland and think about puppies and unicorns. Hashtag not my Wednesday. I don't know, is that what the kids would say? Sure. I don't know. Make a TikTok of it or something. I don't know. I just got a smartphone like 3 years ago, guys. But anyway, they also age Pugsley down. Pugsley is significantly younger than Wednesday, and they age Wednesday up. She's a young adult, which makes it's a little strange. Fester is in love with the moon, which, okay. Some of his numbers are some of the better ones. And Wednesday has one number that's cute. It just musically, the show doesn't do it for me. And isolated from the Addams Family itself, sure, some of the songs are cute and fun. But as part of the Addams Family universe, they just do not work for the characters and for the story. Really, there is one musical number and one character that is the best, and it's not any of the Addamses. It's one of the parents of the normie boy love interest. And that the highlight of the show shouldn't be a non-Addams. Fine, it exists. I'm not a fan. Grandma Addams has a couple of funny lines. One of the plot points that leads to the Act 1 big conflict is that she has a potion that when someone drinks it, it brings out their darkness, and they say and do all of their darkest things, or brings out their darkest tendencies. And she has a line, "Drink this, and Mary Poppins becomes Medea." Amazing. Love that line. She's Grandma Addams she's a lot of fun. Other than that, though, yeah, it's a musical. I don't like it. I'm sorry. If you do, that's cool. It would be a fun show to be in, but yeah, as an Addams fan and as a musical fan, it doesn't do it for me in either respect. So I can't endorse it because I'm important like that. But I have droned on for quite a while, and at this point, I haven't had a sip of water or wine in a while. My voice is probably starting to sound like Lurch. So here is where I will end my Addams Family thoughts and perspectives. I think I know that there were things that I was looking to touch on in more depth, but just kind of going off the cuff. This is what you get for now. But in a later video, I think I would like to revisit the Addams Family and go into a bit more depth with the production of the sitcom of the Barry Sonnenfeld films, and then maybe eventually talk more about Wednesday, maybe with spoilers or spoiler warnings. I don't know. We'll see what comes down along the bend. But that was the Addams Family. I hope you enjoyed and have a great night. This has been Aleece from the Late Late Horror Show, and stay spooky.